record, particularly the questions on Huber and on the legislation. So you have a concern about that. And with that, I want to introduce, first welcome our guests, which I've kind of have done generally, but let's just raise your hand if you're here from Honor the Earth, so we can see who you are. And Craig's going to introduce you, or you're going to be introduced in more detail, and Interfaith Power and Light. And we really appreciate you being here. And I want to acknowledge that I've been working on kind of a sub-team with Sherry Knuth and Craig Cox on putting this together and putting this campaign together. And Craig is going to be our resource person for the Huber Mill Lumber Project, and Sherry's going to be the resource person for the legislative priorities. So, Craig, why don't you go?
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. We are honored, as Jean mentioned, to have at least 3 people, maybe hopefully a 4th, to help us understand yet another threat to tribal treaty lands and the forests, wetlands, and waters that sustain life in northern Minnesota. And most important, to help us understand how we might support their work to right this terrible wrong that's happening in that part of the state at the moment. So to get things moving, I'd like to introduce you to Daniel Lockamacher, who's campaign director, coordinator for Honor the Earth. And Daniel will lead us through the discussion for the next 20 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Craig, Jean, and really for your entire congregation in terms of setting up the committees to be addressing these issues and for inviting us here tonight. Before I do introduce the others with me, I'll give just a very brief overview for those not familiar with the issue. And that is that the Huber Mill, so Huber is a privately owned company. It's a multi-billion-dollar company from North Carolina. And they are looking to build a really massive and not just traditional old style wood mill, but an oriented strand board plant. And so the size of the facility, we're talking like 120 football fields, 10 stories high. So a very large structure. The building alone obviously is going to have a huge impact. And again, what they're actually manufacturing there, it's not just that they're processing logs or timber in the traditional fashion, but they're really creating this new style particle board, plyboard called OSB, or oriented strand board, which has a whole series of risks associated with it itself. The location for where they're planning to do all this is directly next to the Boswell Energy coal plant, and the Huber building on the side of that property is going to be less than a mile from the Leech Lake Reservation boundary. So this is where it is a hugely impactful project to the north, no matter what. And the specific location of it is immensely threatening to the tribe. And it's outside the reservation. For those not familiar, there's also treaty territory across northern Minnesota. And so those are federally protected lands where the United States government has a treaty, nation-to-nation treaty with the Anishinaabe people to have rights to continue to access that land for things like hunting, fishing, ceremony, ricing. These are things that really sustain life for a lot of people up here. And so the land where the plant actually is, although it's not on the reservation, all of it is on this treaty territory. And so it's something that should only happen if it were to happen with tribal consultation, none of which has taken place. So lots of impacts. Obviously, they're intending to then log in a 70 to 100 mile radius around the actual plant, which is all treaty territory, large parts of it, the reservation, which overlaps with national forest lands as well. So that's just a very brief introduction to what is what the issue is, what the concern is that we bring to you tonight. Again, thank you for taking the time to engage in this, to hear what is tough to hear about, because most straightforwardly, it's environmental racism. It clearly is, in terms of the location and other impacts already going on up there. So the guests with me tonight from the Red Lake Nation, again, one of the others that has treaty rights to this land directly where Huber intends to build, is Joshua Jones. So he comes with a perspective of being a tribal member and also being the hydrologist for Red Lake. So very familiar with environmental impacts. Also with me is Jamie Konopacki. She is our environmental counsel for Honor the Earth. And so she is really leading up all of our legal efforts and coordinating as well to see that people like myself have the best legal knowledge to be presenting to others about what is involved in this. So I'll start with Josh, if you're willing to just share some about what you have, for you yourself personally, what you've heard from others, what this means to have this proposal be on the 1855 treaty territory and for there to have been no consultation about the project.
Hello, everyone. You might want to mute yours, Jamie. So anyway, my position at Red Lake is the hydrologist, and one of the big things that we work with the state governor's office is when there's big projects like this, we are supposed to be consulted. It's all treaty territory, there's treaty rights involved, and Governor Walz actually signed into law a nation to nation agreement that we should be consulted on big projects like this. That obviously did not happen until I met Jamie here. We didn't even know anything about it on Red Lake. None of the tribal leadership knew anything about it. So if it wasn't for Jamie, we still probably wouldn't even really know what was going on. And anyway, so the big issues with it are that, yeah, we weren't consulted. There's going to be logging that's going to be going on right in our neck of the woods, right up by Black Duck, which is by Red Lake. So there's going to be impacts, and at a minimum for a project like this, there should be an environmental impact statement, and that'll cover all of the different levels of potential environmental impacts that may happen, and how they would be addressed if something were to happen. And as of right now, they gave the city of Cohasset kind of all of the ability to decide whether or not that would happen, and they're neither qualified to do that, or shouldn't be the responsible party. So that's kind of where we're at with it right now. As Red Lake Nation stands, is we should be consulted. So we should still be consulted, and they need to do a more thorough environmental assessment of what this project. It's not a matter if, it's how it's going to affect the environment, and that needs to be answered before they move anywhere with it.
Thanks so much, Josh. And Jamie, if you're willing, could you bring the group up to speed a bit more on how this came about? In initially Huber trying to avoid having to do that EIS, that environmental impact statement, and kind of where things went from there to the city of Cohasset.
You addressed me, right? Sorry, I had you muted to avoid an echo situation in the other room. Okay.
Yeah, yes, I did, Jamie. Just asking if you could kind of share some of how it came about that there was an attempt to bypass the EIS through the legislature, how it ended up with Cohasset, and how, despite that, I know you're very familiar, having written our honors legal argument to Cohasset about the other triggers that should have taken place that still do require this environmental impact statement.
Sure. I saw a question from Jean, so I'll answer that and then I'll move to the general stuff. So at a high level, the environmental impacts are several fold. In the 70 to 100 mile area surrounding the plant, they want to log 400,000 cords of wood per year. Across the state, we currently sit at about 875,000 cords of wood per year. So just to give you an idea of the extent, right, and the concentration of logging that they're proposing is incredibly significant. Aside from the logging, there is an immediate wetland fill impact. So right now they are applying to the state and the federal government to fill a minimum of 30 acres of wetlands. And they not only want to fill those wetlands, they want to put a railroad immediately through the wetland, a 3.3 mile railroad track that would have, my recollection is about 30 trips per day of raw materials and finished products. As Daniel mentioned, people gather specific ceremonial items, different types of wood, different types of plants in and around wetlands and have for generations. In addition, those wetlands are hydrologically connected to Blackwater Creek, which is a really important rising water body on the Mississippi River. In addition to the water impacts from filling the wetland and contamination from the railroad operation through the wetland that's also connected to the rising waters, there's a significant concern about air deposition. So in addition to becoming, it's estimated by the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy that they'd be between the 11th and the 13th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the state, which is incredibly concerning because we are already failing to meet our greenhouse gas goals. There is the immediate acute impacts from particulate. So for folks that are familiar, PM10 and PM2.5 are really small particles that pose major threats to lung and heart health. And it is recognized by the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Health, that the Anishinaabe population is already an at-risk population. So in addition to just heart health and lung health issues, there's a very significant risk of premature death. We're talking hundreds of thousands of tons of particulate matter per year blowing in one of two directions, both of which are reservation lands, all of which are treaty territory where people are actively hunting and gathering ricing, maple syrup, etc. So wetland fill, air particulate, which is human health, obviously, greenhouse gas emissions, logging, Endangered Species Acts. Right on the site, they want to get rid of 2 bald eagles nests, and they've proposed to just give a few $1,000s, and that's supposed to be good. Bald eagles or Magizi in Anishinaabe tradition are sacred, and it's for those that haven't watched, we've put together a video showing the flight of this nesting pair of bald eagles on the site, whose nests they want to destroy. There's also a significant concern. Gray wolves have recently been relisted and have the impact to their territory, which is throughout the project, has not been evaluated. Several other endangered or threatened species are at risk. Daniel, am I forgetting any major ones off the top of my list? Impact-wise, but you get the gist. There's not an aspect of nature that is untouched by this project. So as Daniel said, it's 120 football fields, 10 stories high. So just the physical footprint of the plant, and then also the cumulative impact, right? These the populations living immediately around this area have already been significantly impacted for decades by Minnesota's largest remaining coal-fired power plant, which is literally they're selling some of their land to this company from the Carolinas to build this other major industrial facility, right? This coal facility is supposed to retire, and instead we're bringing in another industrial polluter right next door, which is going to then give this power facility reason to operate even longer. It's pretty horrific, and that facility next door has already filled wetlands and impacted the wetlands and the waters around there in order to operate. I can pause there. Jean, does that give you some of what you were looking for? Okay.
Could I just show, so Shay, I need to have my share enabled. I wanted to just show people your website, which is so excellent. So I'll just say, Sherry put the link in the chat. So please open on your own the Honor the Earth webpage, all about this project, which shows the 5 tribes that will be impacted. It has the video that Jamie just talked about. So it's really excellent. So I just recommend it.
Thank you. Yeah, and there's actually 7 sovereign nations up here that will be impacted.
Oh.
5 are a little closer, but 7 that actually have treaty rights. So it gets it's really concerning, the lack of consultation in this case. It's, it's not one tribal nation, but 7 that have been blatantly disregarded. So the project got started in the middle of 2020, and it wasn't disclosed. So the state kind of negotiated in the dark for almost half a year and put together about a $50 million subsidy package before really even knowing who the company was or what they wanted to do up here. They just wanted to bring in this big project with hopes of jobs and tax creation. It was early January, I think 2021, when Huber said, surprise, it's us, and we want to do oriented strand board. And then on top of the state subsidies, the local government, Cohasset, and the county started throwing things in. And that was about the time also where people said, what are the major legislative hurdles that are going to irk us, and how do we get around them? So DEED and IRRB, the 2 state agencies that were leading the monetary negotiations with the company, they said, well, hey, 15 years ago, we did this legislative trick, and, voila, this company didn't have to do an EIS because we just wrote an exemption in. So towards the end of the last budget cycle, they just pulled that old play back from their playbook and worked with a few legislators up north and did the same thing. They had been discussing for over a year at that point all the money aspects of the project, but not a single environmental impact had been discussed before everybody was all too willing to pass a legislative exemption to one of the EIS requirements. But what you'll notice when you look at the comments that were submitted to the city of Cohasset, because of the massive size of this project, because of the several types of environmental impacts associated with it, they triggered at least 3 or 4 mandatory EIS and EAW categories, which myself, Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, and the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe all raised. The city just ignored that. But it's highly likely, and this decision is in the process of being appealed, that they triggered, the exemption that was written into the budget bill was narrow. And it's highly likely they triggered other mandatory EIS categories, and so are still in violation of the law. Notwithstanding that narrow exemption, the way the law works is once you do the EAW, which is the process they had to do, it's kind of a shorter worksheet form environmental assessment. And the whole point of that is to say, if there's a substantial impact, environmental impact associated with a project, the EAW will show you that, and then you do an EIS. And they were not exempted from that trajectory. If the EAW showed that there was the potential for significant environmental impacts from their project, then they should have still been required to do an EIS. The problem is, as Joshua alluded to, that we had a small city government that had no capability and had already publicly proclaimed several times that they wanted this project to go forward, evaluating the comments submitted about the project. So in their mind, despite everything that I told you at the outset, this project does not have the potential for significant effects, and therefore they did not see the need for an EIS. As you can tell from my commentary, I have opinions about the veracity of that opinion. But that's kind of how we got there. It was really a financial proposition to the state. The record documents that we have through a public records request show that timeline. They show the communications. And they show that the agencies came up with this idea to waive the EIS requirement because it is something they had done in the past when courting another large company.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And yeah, that's where just the depth of complicity on the part of the state and this local government body, it was, I mean, painful to watch, in that we went to the city council meeting in which they had promised there would be the opportunity for people like for anyone, but specifically people like Annie and Josh, members of the tribes, to be able to come and speak to their concerns over this. And then the city of Cohasset shut down any opportunity for public comment and just unanimously voted to pass it. It was really a really tough experience to just sit through and see that blatant shutout of Indigenous voices. I do want to highlight, we do have our fourth guest with us as well. Annie Humphrey is here. Annie is a Leech Lake member She's an artist and musician as well. I encourage you check out, I'll drop the link to her site in the chat to check out some of what she's done. It's great. But Annie, now that you've joined us, Jamie has laid out, as ever she does in such a great way, so many of these environmental impacts and the ways in which they violate state law. But I think folks would be really interested to hear from you, as I know I have, in being able to visit like your sugar bush camp and just hear from you about what these forests mean to you and to your family, and how they use the land and the resources, and the relationship they have rather than just using it with this area, with this land that Huber intends to destroy.
Well, hello everybody. Sorry, I'm late. But I guess I would start with the fact that I grew up on Leech Lake, and I grew up in such a way that we did live with the land, and it wasn't something I just did once in a while, and it wasn't something, I mean, from infancy to present day, we have my family really fortunate that my father taught us to live like, my dad grew up in the bush, and so, and Ojibwe was his first language. And so he showed us to live like this. And it's really, really land connected, seasonal, you know, the seasons and the weather and all those little things that some people just don't even think about. You know, don't think about the temperatures or the direction of the wind when you want to set a net or things like that. So just living like that. And on this reservation, you know, this is my homeland. I've lived in Japan, I've lived in California, I've lived in North Carolina, lived in Canada for a while, but you know, this is my reference point right here. And I always come back to here. The thought of this factory and this corporation building in Cohasset, it was like just like this bomb dropped on us. And you know, the thought of its tentacles reaching out into, you know, into my homeland and through it and across it and reaching into all the surrounding lands. It's really, I have this feeling of doom, you know, and I don't know at what point, I don't know how far I would go to protect my sugar bush, because my sugar bush is, you know, popple and maple, and they want popple and maple. And you know, I was talking to my son last night, and I said, you know, I've never had, well, I was in the Marine Corps, but I've never taken like a physical stand, you know, against a corporation to protect our lands. But I told my son, if I had to do it this time, it's so close to home. And they really, really could ruin this way of life for my adult kids, and I have grandkids. They could ruin that way of life for my grandsons. And what would I do to protect that? I guess we'll see. We'll see how far this whole thing goes. And I told my son, you know, I don't want to get in harm's way. I want to give my life up for this, for a bunch of trees, but I would for my grandson's way of life. And I just reminded him that our ancestors before us have died, you know, have died to try to stand in between what was coming and their families. And I feel that I'm starting to understand that. And so that is why I asked around who's doing the community engagement, who's you know, engaging the community and doing the outreach. And nobody really could do it because everybody's really busy. Everybody's wearing a lot of hats, everybody in honor and people in Leech Lake. And, you know, it's, so like Daniel said, I'm a singer and I'm an artist, and I actually got a bachelor's degree in education. But when COVID hit, I went back for carpentry. So carpentry is deforestation. I mean, they're both connected, but you know, my thing now is, you know, we can say they're the bad guys. We can say they're wrong. And I truly believe that they are, but I also think that there needs to be an answer to this problem. You know, so building with hemp, we don't need OSB, and we don't need siding or sheetrock or house wrap or 6 mil plastic. You don't need any of that when you build with hemp. So I think that saying no to something, we got to have an answer. We have to have a solution. We have to offer a solution. And I guess, I don't know if this is even off topic. I'm not sure what our topic, we're just talking about the Huber Mill. It's bigger than that to me. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than, we got to stop this factory. Yeah, we do, but we have to find a way to tell the rest of the world we need to stop using OSB. I'm sure they'll find something else they can use too, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm going to school every day. I'm organizing meetings to get the people aware of what's happening and give them a place to, not be silenced. And I think that's really important. And I will outreach as far as I can in this big 200-mile circle. But for now, we're in Bemidji and Walker, Cass Lake, and Grand Rapids, which is really close to Cohasset. But we'll go further to the outskirts of the reservation, to S Lake Community, Boys Fort, Ely, Duluth, and we'll just keep on going. So that's like Sugarbush is going, we tapped our trees. The weather's not really optimal right now because it's getting cold again. But that's what we're doing right now. Getting sap, making maple syrup. Because I gotta drink it with my coffee. I like my coffee really sweet and I don't eat white sugar.
Thank you so much, Annie. And yeah, the opportunity, thank you personally as well for inviting me out to your sugar bush to be able to experience that firsthand. For others, if you ever do have the opportunity where that's going on as either a family or community event, I really encourage you to participate in that if you're ever invited. It is truly something special. And I want to be mindful of our time as well. And so just very briefly put out in terms of action right now, if you go to that protectmnforests.org website and click any of the take action buttons that are along the different sections describing some of the things that each of the speakers mentioned, it will take you to a petition, or not a petition, a way to submit a comment to the Army Corps of Engineers. That is the next step in the permitting process. Is Cohasset approved this moving forward without an environmental impact statement? However, Huber is still required to get a series of different permits. The next upcoming one is from the Army Corps of Engineers. So Jamie is leading us in submitting a very well-documented, legal comment, and this federal agency hearing from people who are also interested and affected. And so it's not just, a couple organizations saying something, but they're not used to necessarily hearing from the general public about concerns. And so that makes a difference. And so that would be our encouragement for taking action right now. I'll continue to be around at the end for questions as well. I think we've more than filled the time that you've given us. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to share about these concerns. Yes, Peter's question.
Daniel, I'm going to suggest that we come back to that because we're going to have to move to the legislation, or you could chat it too. You could write a response in the chat for all of us, but also we'll come back in the end. I just really want to thank you, Annie, for joining us to give us that direct experience of the land in your way of life, in your family's way of life, and the potential impact. And also Joshua, for your view from Red Lake and as a hydrologist, and of course Daniel and Jamie and from Honor the Earth. And we look forward to more conversation with those of you who can stay at the end. We're going to shift a little to hear about, because our second campaign is really focused on legislation, climate legislation in our Minnesota State Legislature. And some of it does directly relate, one piece of it relates directly to this project